All right. Welcome to my thoughts on this and also on that. This episode is going to be the first one in an effort to create a series called Carcasts. I'm always driving in my car. I love driving in my car. It's a time when I get to reflect and think. And, I like my solitude. Always have. Someone who grew up very much like playing alone in my room, whether that be with Legos or drawing pictures or making things, or later on playing guitar, writing songs. I've always been someone who enjoys my solitude. So driving in the car, I've always enjoyed, put on some music or a podcast or audiobook and just zone out and just kind of, just get into a bit of a meditation. So I had an idea of why don't I do some car casts. Right now I'm driving to Santa Monica to practice for a gig. Some friends of mine are playing at the Viper Room. A couple nights, or in a couple days, so got about an hour drive. So I thought I'd do a car cast, but I was thinking what kind of topic should I discuss? So we're turning a whole bunch of things over my head and trying to decide whether or not I want to risk the chance of this being completely unusable on a topic that I'd really like to save for a better time. I came to the conclusion, what if I did a podcast on... Hang on, I'm about to have a wreck. Would that be something to capture a wreck on a podcast? Let me just take this moment to point out the fact that whenever people see flashing lights, they lose their minds. Flashing cop lights has to be the number one cause of traffic of all time. I can't tell you how many times I've been stuck in traffic and I pull up and I get to, the source of the traffic, and it's like some flashing lights. It's like we're just like lightning bugs, or like those bugs that are drawn to the little bug zapper, following the light. Ooh, wow, flashing lights. Anyways, so I thought, what would be a cool topic? And I thought, what if I talked about my grandfathers? Now, both of my grandfathers have passed away. First, my mom's grandfather, my mom's dad passed away, and then I think it was right after my daughter was born, so that was in 2015, and then I think the next year, my other grandfather passed away. But, I think it's interesting to take a look at the people we are shaped by, and the family tree and the family history, and the type of people we learn from and grow from and benefit from and all that kind of stuff. But start with, so my mom is from Maryland, and her dad, his name was Alva Rodney Melhuse III. But we always called him Skipper. And I don't know if that was a nickname from military or a family nickname, but he was a sailor, and he was in the military, was in the Air Force, and he was a musician. He could play a variety of different instruments, and growing up, he was always somebody that I really clicked with. I obviously clicked with both of my grandfathers, but in two very different ways. This grandfather was real laid back, real, loved to talk about music and loved to just spend time together, talking, sitting. He was very good at holding space, being present, good quality time, that sort of thing. Liked to take his time, loved to eat. He loved buffets. I can't tell you how many times we went to buffets, and he would always, he would get a whole lot of food, many plates, but he would take his time. He would savor every bite. And, I always used to tease him because I would get done so quick, and he'd be like, I like to savor my food. I like to enjoy it, because once it's gone, it's gone. And, it's probably a good lesson, a little nugget of wisdom there. But, when I was little, I just loved to spend time with my grandfather. I would go on these little trips. I would get to spend a couple weeks with my grandparents up in Maryland, and they would always take us they had this vacation trailer, and like a little, vacation kind of, it's like, you say trailer park, it sounds trashy, but it was actually like a nice place up in, I think it was Fenwick Island up in Ocean City, Maryland. And we'd go up there, and it was right on the bay, and the Chesapeake Bay. We'd go up there, and it was just like real quiet, and we'd ride a bike around, or go to the neighborhood pool, or we'd go to the beach. But I just remember being so blissed out in these experiences. We would drive like 3 hours in the car. And there was always these little landmarks where you knew, where you were in the trip when you started to see certain things. And there was this one particular bridge, the Bay Bridge, that I used to love going over, and that was how you knew you were getting close to the ocean and all the fun and all that sort of stuff. But this was kind of, the formative years of my musical, upbringing. My grandfather had these cream-colored tapes, cassette tapes that he would play, and they had, things like the Beach Boys or Frankie Valli, the Four Seasons. I remember hearing "Sherry, Sherry, Baby," and being like, "Man, it's the catchiest freaking song." Or what was another one? Trying to think of some other songs. It was like Diana Ross and Supremes and Stevie Wonder, and just a lot of Motown stuff. And also, what was that one? Run Around Sue, or something like that. I'm a Run Around Sue. Oh, I don't know who sings that really, but I used to jam to these songs in the back seat. My grandparents would sing along, I would sing along. It was just like such fond memories. And then we would get to the ocean, or we would get to their trailer, and first thing that had to be done was like, you gotta, like, especially if it was the first time down in a while, or you had to kind of open the trailer all the ways that it was closed down, or the things you do when you leave a space that you're not going to be at for a while. And we would usually go out to eat that night, or stick around the trailer and make some food. Or I remember, up in Maryland, there was always, the crabs. Maryland blue crabs are a big, industry up there, and you can get a lot of steamed crabs, which are delicious with this like Old Bay seasoning on there. And usually we'd save that later in the week for a surprise or whatever. But there's all these things we would do. We would go to the beach, during the day. After the beach, we would go to Dairy Queen, get some ice cream. Grandfather would give me these rolls of quarters to play. I remember like playing like Street Fighter or these other arcade games at Dairy Queen, or we'd sit there and have like peanut butter milkshakes. Remember early in the morning though, it was always like, being a kid with your grandparents are like, taking their sweet time. They're content with like, they're not in a hurry. And as a kid, you're just like in a hurry to get to the next thing, And always just trying to get them to go. Oh, when are we going to go? When are we going to, there's other stuff you have to do to prepare to go to the beach. At the beach, my grandfather was the one that taught me how to dive at a pool. He taught me how to swim. He taught me how to handle myself in the ocean. He taught me how to ride waves, body surf. he was always a real fun guy, and we'd go get ice cream, and then at night we'd always pick things to do, we'd go back, have some dinner, or we'd go out to eat sometimes, but sometimes, at night we go to get ice cream again at some of the cool spot where you have all these toppings, and I'm putting a bunch of sprinkles and whipped cream and different candy shops, whatever, or you go play putt-putt, or you go, what else would we do? We'd go out on the boardwalk. The boardwalk was sweet because, all these flashing lights and games and rides, and, you could win tickets and all this. It was just like a plethora of sensory excitement as a kid, And then one of the nights we would get crabs, steamed crabs, and, we'd always see how many, you pay by the dozen. A lot of times it was all you can eat, so that's usually what we used to look for, so we could have as much. And I remember one time my grandfather and I, we ate like 6 dozen crabs in between the two of us. And I'll never forget, my grandmother was just sitting there. They also had this steamed crab soup, which was really good, she crab soup or whatever. And my grandmother was just sitting there watching us eat. We were probably there for a couple hours or more, but it was like on the television was the sumo wrestling. My grandmother was like watching the sumo wrestling while me and my grandfather devoured these crabs. And just like a really, really fond memories, but they just really built this like good relationship with my grandparents and my grandfather. We always had, he and I were always very close. I was his first grandchild. I was everybody's first, I was the first grandchild, period, in my, my family, the oldest and the first grandchild. So naturally puts you in a nice position to get spoiled and showered with affection, all that kind of stuff. But I always just had a great relationship with my grandfather. We'd always talk on the phone for a while, and fill him in on all the stuff, or what music I was listening to, or what music I was writing. And I would always bring my music to him, and always play my guitar with him while he would listen, and sometimes he would play drums along, or he would always play a beat with his fingers like on the chair or the countertop, and he was always real content to sitting, listening, and sharing time, and he always would give me feedback, on the music, like, maybe hear more of the bass or the drums, or the, the vocals should be louder, or these types of things, and was always just real encouraging and very present, I'm going to check and make sure this is still working here. There, we're still going. Would always have deep conversations, like he always had a lot of wisdom and interesting, things to talk about, or he liked to read a lot, always very spiritually enlightened, someone that very much grew up in the church and was a family man and took good care of his family, and just a lot of fun. But that, it was a particular relationship that he and I had. It was very special, and I'm sure there's plenty more I could say, and maybe I'll think of some other things, but for now I'll move on to my other grandfather. So my other grandfather, he was from I think Tennessee. He might have been from further south, but my dad's from Tennessee, and so I have my northern grandparents, I have my southern grandparents, and my northern grandparents used to say words like water and stone, and my grandfather used to say, like, in Maryland, would say, like, I remember using the term like nitwit. People would pull out in front of us in the car and be like, "You nitwit," But my other grandparents are Southern. My dad's dad, Billy Joe Joslin. he grew up very poor. He used to tell us stories about picking cotton, making money picking cotton, and he had like this little donkey or something a little mule that he would bring with him to work, and he had to walk really far or something to work, and he just grew up really poor. I think he was one of like many brothers and sisters, maybe even the youngest. I think my other grandfather was the youngest as well, and also kind of a smaller guy growing up, kind of a little whippersnapper, a little kind of used to get into fights and stuff. But my dad's dad, because he grew up really poor, he was always determined and really had a strong work ethic and worked really hard, and ended up becoming a banker, like a successful banker. Not like a huge banker, but like a local bank. Did well, invested well, was real smart with his money. But this grandfather was hilarious. Like, he was always real quick-witted, really funny, and always really goofy. Both of them were really funny and goofy. Both made like really funny faces and could always make you laugh. Both they were always just like really good-spirited, really fun people to be around, really happy. All very. My other grandfather was very spiritual. Now my Billy Joe Papaw. So my grandfather in Maryland called him Pop-Pop, and my grandfather in Knoxville called him Papaw. And they're both Southern Baptists. Both grew up in the church, or at least very strong Southern church values, family values. But my dad's dad was like real put together. He always carried a comb in his back pocket. Both of them did, really. But my other grandfather's a little more laid back, I think, than my Papaw. Papaw, he was a little, he had a tendency to worry. He was real protective, and he would always, they both would always give me, a little cash here and there or whatever. But my Papaw, he was always one that took real good care of me. I think my first car I got from my parents, but there was some point where I traded in. I don't know. He had like some Ford Explorer. He always had this real good relationship with this one particular dealership in Knoxville. That's where my grandparents are from, in Tennessee, Knoxville, or lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I remember, he had like this Ford Explorer, and somehow I went from having my Mitsubishi Mirage, and then all of a sudden they like gave me this Ford Explorer, and then from there I traded it in. I got like a 4Runner, and that was through my grandparents in Knoxville, which I don't really know how or why or what, but it's very kind of them. I don't know what the situation was between them and my parents, but very generous. And but growing up with them, we lived in, got a little rain happening. We lived in, we'll see how this goes with the rain. Lived in Nashville area, and my grandparents living in Knoxville. We drive up and meet them in Cookville. Meet them in Cookville, I think at the Dairy Queen there. It's funny how I always stop at Dairy Queen and get some ice cream, or that's where they would drop us off or go hang with my grandparents in Knoxville. And now growing up with them, they lived on a lake that had a boat. So we would go, had a tree house, and had this really cool old house on the lake with all these cool old toys of my my dad's and my aunts. We would go boating on the lake. We'd go skiing. We would hit golf balls. I learned to play golf from my grandfather in Knoxville. He would take me to play golf, and got my first set of golf clubs from him, and learned to love just like Golf Digest magazines, because he had a subscription. I would always read them. He'd always share with me like his latest golf tip that he had learned, and and growing up, he was always about like combing your hair and shaving your face and dressing nice and all that kind of stuff. As I got older, it became more of a kind of a joke between us. He always used to joke like, "Boy, let me need me to lend you a quarter so you can go buy a razor," because I never would shave my face. I let my beard, kind of grow out, or my scruff or whatever, and he would always clean shaven and always had a good haircut and always was just like to the nines, because he worked in a bank and that was kind of his shtick, So he and I kind of, he was always very kind, but I think it always bothered him, He was, I guess, probably a perfectionist or kind of OCD in certain ways, but I remember growing up, it was like, I always had issues like getting my car registered. Still do. I think my last, I always end up paying extra, especially in California, so expensive. End up paying extra because my car is like, I'm someone who can make, a song and a beat and produce a track in like, an hour, but like forgets how to like, do the basic things of life, the stuff that people do, like I just forget, or like it's not that high on my priority list, or mailing things, I don't know, all the stuff that you're supposed to do, like, or even I remember in school, it was like I would always forget to do stupid things, like put my name on my paper, or like, but my grandfather, he would always save my butt in those situations. I'd come to visit, he would always fill up my tank, he'd always clean my car, he would always get my car registered, all the types of things, because I think it bothered him, or he would worry a lot, he would always worry, always tell me, "Boy, make sure you put on your seatbelt, always go the speed limit," and all this kind of stuff. All right, Papa, no, I think he got better with age, but always tendency to be a little controlling, or, you wouldn't want to tell him too much of what's going on sometimes, because then you'd have to like, he liked to control or like get involved, which was always very helpful. And I wrote a song about both of my grandfathers, and you can kind of tell the difference in the relationship in the songwriting, but the one about my grandfather, Pop was more about his family tree, and my grandfather, I remember hearing stories about how he wanted to play music but kind of put that dream away in order to have a family. And he worked I think he might have even worked at the same company, for a long time. I think it was Bendrix, some kind of a, he was an electric engineer or electronics company. And his kind of perspective, what he taught his children was, you go to college, you get a good degree, we work hard, you get a scholarship, you go to college, get a good job, and you work your way up through the ranks, and you take care of your family, and that was his thing. And what I wrote about in the song that I wrote for him, it's just about his legacy, about, he had 4 kids, like freaking like 14 or 20 something grandkids, it's like my mom had 3 boys, his other daughter had 4 boys, his son has 5 kids, 4 of which are boys, his oldest has 2 kids. I mean, it's like tons of grandkids. And it was just like a real family oriented guy. And then my other Papa, he only had 2 kids, and my aunt, she doesn't have any kids, but she loves animals, has lots of animals. My parents, I'm one of 3, and so, it was always a real special bond between us, because we were their only grandkids, 3 of us, and they definitely spoiled us. We were definitely spoiled. Christmas Christmas time at my grandparents was always a lot of fun. Just great relation. The song I wrote about my grandfather, my papaw, it was called Cardboard Box, and the hook says, if it wasn't for my papaw, I'd be living in a cardboard box, because my grandfather, papaw, bailed me out of so many jams, dude. It's like all of us, I feel like, just bailed us out of a lot of jams, It seemed to be like all the stuff that he ended up had to pay so much money, registration fees, and just like it always seemed to revolve around our cars, getting oil changes or new tires, or I don't know, man. Just always seemed like he was having to spend. Every time I went there, it was just like, but it wasn't like I asked him. He would just kind of like, because he was like, he liked to do stuff for us. He would go check our cars out, vacuum them, he'd take them to wash them and put gas in them, and inevitably find out that like the registration is like 6 months overdue. I think he was worried, that I get pulled over by a cop and get tickets, or probably end up paying some of those, man. Because I don't know, man. That stuff just always ends up kind of like falling by the wayside for me. The details of life, I tend to just let kind of fall through the cracks. But two great men, two great men who, took care of their families. They both had their own issues. Everybody has their issues. I don't believe that I really, I always kind of heard about situations of like, growing up, what it was like for my parents under certain, the difference between the two grandparents, or the two parenting styles, or what, when they're your grandparents, you get different. It's a different situation, you just get spoiled. You get to all the good stuff, but I'm someone that's very fortunate. Not only grew up in a good immediate family, but outside of that, just like great grandparents, men of God, men of character, with flaws, yes, but ultimately, taught you how to be a man, taught you how to treat people, taught you what mattered, what values. I owe my life to these men. Very grateful to have been. I think it's true that generations benefit from the godliness and character of the men and women that come before us. My grandparents were praying. My grandfathers were praying men. One of them, military man. The other one might as well have been military man with the attention to detail he did in his work. I wish I would have asked my grandfather more about investments. He was very investment savvy. He always put money away in our names, as well as he had his own way of investing in stocks, but he also put money away. Since we were born, he put money away for us, and that was a lot of what he pulled from and bailed us out. And I think his philosophy was he didn't want to. A lot of grandparents leave you money or investments or trust funds or whatever. They financially savvy and leave a legacy for you. But I remember my parents saying, and my grandmother saying, he wanted to be around to kind of see the fruits of his labor benefit his grandchildren. So as opposed to leaving, money to us or property to us or whatever after he passed, he would rather see us and get to be a part of us benefiting from it, which I think is really cool. And both of them, were just very kind and generous people, and loving, very loving, good husbands. I remember my grandmother's a great cook. My southern grandmother, Mamaw, she always loved to cook, and so she is very fortunate to have both my grandmothers still alive, and she loved to cook and make these great meals, and my grandfather would always do the dishes every time, without fail. He would always clean all the dishes afterwards, every one of these meals. And there were, a lot of dishes, a lot of plates and platters and all the stuff, that Southern grandmothers make, pies and all that. And he would always clean all the dishes by hand. Obviously, there's a dishwasher, but he would always, do them by hand as well. And I remember my pop-up, fond memories of, he would always refer to my grandmother as, hey, beautiful, or hey, gorgeous. They would always hold hands, even until they're, till the last, days of his life. Just always, very good husbands, and very kind, and there was always funny things, like my Papa would always talk over my grandmother in funny ways, of course, but and there's funny ways they would pick at each other, but it was always very playful and loving. So not everybody's as fortunate to grow up with great grandparents. I was fortunate to grow up with great grandfathers who taught me how to be a man, how to be a person of faith, to follow Jesus. I had this really awesome letter from my Papa, my northern grandfather, that I keep in my drawer. It's really cool, handwritten letter of just like, something to keep what he thought of me and observations about me, and words of encouragement. It was like, I always knew you would do well, and it's very meaningful to me, So I hope you're fortunate to have some cool stories about your grandparents, grandfathers. At some point I'll do one about my grandmothers, not necessarily after they pass, or maybe before, but just thought it'd be fun to do one about my grandfather. Who knows, this might be totally unusable and unintelligible, and have to do it again, but I don't know, we'll see. Hopefully this is something that's interesting and fun, and definitely think very fondly of my grandfathers, and if they're listening up in heaven or whatever, grateful for them and all of the ways that they loved me, cared for me, taught me, and all the good times I'll never forget. Thank you, Pop-Pop. Thank you, Papaw. And thank you, folks, for listening. Hope you have a good one. Take care. Until next time.